Hi everyone, my name is Rachel. I'm in my 40s, and I recently married my husband, Michael. Michael has a son from a previous marriage, Ryan, who is now in his early 20s. Ryan is an intelligent, polite young man. He moved in with us to finish his degree and quickly became a welcome part of our blended family. It wasn't always easy adjusting to his new life, but over time we all grew closer together. Today I want to share a story that is dear to me. The story of a day that should have been simple, but turned out to be unforgettable. Let me take you back to that time. It was a sunny Saturday morning. Michael had left early for work this weekend, leaving Ryan and I alone for the next couple days. I turned on my favorite playlist and decided to do a few chores around the house. The sunlight poured through the windows, creating a warm glow, and it was the perfect day to get things in order. I chose a casual outfit, a light top and mini skirt, just something easy to move around in, comfortable for a day of cleaning. I knew Ryan was home, but he usually sleeps off on the weekends, so I figured I had a few hours before I'd see him. I walked through the living room, dusting shelves and wiping down surfaces, unaware that I was being watched. Suddenly, I felt someone's presence behind me. Turning around, I found Ryan standing at the entrance to the room, leaning against the doorway. He was looking at me with an expression on his face that I hadn't seen before, almost curiosity and surprise. I smiled warmly at him, brushing away the shyness that crept up. "Good morning, Ryan," I said in a cheerful voice. He blinked, as if coming back to reality, and was finally able to smile. "Good morning," he replied, but his eyes lingered a little longer than usual, scanning the room, and then stopped on me again. I felt like he wanted to say something, but he remained silent, just watching me go back to my business. I could feel him watching me, and for some unknown reason I felt a flutter in my stomach. Maybe it was the silence of the house or the way the morning light softened everything around us. But in that moment something changed, as if we were sharing a private world that belonged only to us. Wiping the dust off the top shelves, I noticed Ryan move a little closer, his gaze fixed on me as if he was seeing me for the first time. I felt my cheeks warm under his gaze, but kept my tone light, commenting on little things to break the silence between us. We chatted about his classes and weekend plans, though he seemed distracted. His answers were thoughtful but brief. At one point, I reached up to correct a picture frame on a high shelf. My skirt hitched up slightly as I reached up. Looking over my shoulder, I noticed his eyes widen and lower before he quickly looked away. I felt a slight thrill at his reaction, a feeling I hadn't expected but couldn't deny. At that moment, I miscalculated my balance and stumbled slightly. Before I could straighten up, his strong arms wrapped around my waist. I mumbled a thank you, but my voice sounded softer than I wanted it to. A blush appeared on his cheeks, but he didn't pull his hands away. Instead, his fingers lingered on my waist for another second, and there was a warmth in his gaze that seemed brand new. "It's not a problem," he replied quietly, his voice a little unsure, as if he felt as off balance as I did. The air between us charged, and I couldn't escape the feeling that this wasn't just a normal morning anymore. The rest of the day passed in a tension that neither of us paid attention to, but that we couldn't ignore. Toward evening, Michael called and said he'd be home late, some sort of unexpected problem at work that required his attention. Hanging up the phone, I glanced over at Ryan, catching his gaze. He seemed to read my thoughts, because an understanding smile played on his lips. We spent the rest of the evening in unspoken agreement, moving next to each other with a sense of awareness we hadn't had before. I could feel Ryan's presence even when I wasn't looking directly at him. It seemed like every moment was stretched out, every second an echo of the tension that hung between us. The smallest gestures, his hand reaching out to me as we passed, his gaze lingering on me as I worked in the kitchen, all reinforced the sense that we were on the verge of something neither of us could define. As night fell, we decided to watch a movie together, settling down in the dimly lit living room. I settled on one end of the couch and Ryan on the other. Halfway through the movie, a scene played in which a couple was sharing an intimate moment, and I felt Ryan's gaze shift to me. My pulse quickened, and I turned to meet his eyes and found them filled with an intensity I wasn't prepared for. There was vulnerability in his expression, and it seemed like he was waiting for me to make a move or give him permission to make one. No sooner had we spoken than a loud thumping sound came from the backyard. The sound shattered the fragile bond that had just formed between us. Ryan immediately jumped to his feet, and I followed him into the kitchen, where we peered out the back window. There was some shadowy figure moving near the barn. Panic filled my chest. Ryan grabbed a kitchen knife off the table, his face tense. He turned to me, his voice low but firm. "Stay here, Rachel." I nodded, my heart racing as I watched him walk outside. My gaze followed him as he cautiously approached the barn. I could barely make out what was going on, but I heard a scuffle, the sound of something falling, and then silence. Anxiety gripped me, and I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police. Every second seemed like an eternity, and I held my breath, listening for any sign that he was okay. Suddenly the back door swung open and Ryan burst into the room with a serious expression on his face. "Call 911, he said, his voice sounding harsh but controlled. "Someone tried to break into the barn but got away." I dialed the number quickly, my hands shaking. Ryan stayed close, his eyes never taking his eyes off the backyard and his knuckles turning white as he gripped the knife. The police arrived a few minutes later, combing the backyard and surrounding area. They found signs of forced entry in the shed, but the intruder was gone. One of the officers asked us a series of questions while the other took notes. I was shaking from the adrenaline rush, but Ryan's presence beside me was a solid anchor. When the police officers left, the house was quiet again, but the atmosphere had changed. Ryan put the knife down and turned to me, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed it. I stepped closer to him, instinctively wanting to comfort him. "Thank you," I whispered. His eyes sank into mine, and for a long moment I thought the world had narrowed to the two of us. Without thinking, I reached out, and my fingers touched his arm. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me to him, and I felt his heart beat against mine. The closeness of that embrace was overwhelming, filled with all the things we never said. But as much as I wanted to stay in this moment, I realized we were standing on dangerous ground. I pulled away, giving him a small, shaky smile. "We need to rest," I said in a barely audible whisper. Ryan nodded, his gaze lingering on mine for another moment before he looked away. "Yeah, you're right," he said quietly, and we both realized that we had just narrowly avoided crossing a line that could change everything. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't help but remember everything that had happened. The closeness, the fear, the warmth of Ryan's arms around me. It was a day that started out so simple, but turned into something unforgettable, something that shook me to the core. The danger from the intruder had passed, but the tension between Ryan and I was still there, just under the surface, waiting. The next day things were different between us, not aloof, but more wary. Ryan and I avoided direct eye contact, and the tension was palpable, as if we were both afraid that one wrong move would shatter the careful balance we'd managed to maintain. Michael returned early in the morning, unaware of the commotion that had occurred in his absence. He hugged me warmly, and I forced myself to smile, trying hard to hide the storm of emotion raging inside me. Over the next few days, Ryan and I danced around each other, trying not to get too close, not to touch each other, not to let our gazes linger, and yet the tension between us was impossible to ignore. Every movement of our hands, every casual touch was filled with unspoken words. One afternoon, as I was making dinner, Ryan walked into the kitchen, and for a moment, the silence between us became unbearable. He cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Rachel," he began, his voice hesitant. I looked up, my heart racing. "Yes?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice came out strained. He paused, as if trying to find the right words. I wanted to say thank you for trusting me last night. I know it wasn't easy, and I'm glad you're okay." I smiled, warmth spilling into my chest. "You were really brave, Ryan. I don't know what I would have done without you." Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw something flicker in his gaze, emotion, raw and real. It startled me and excited me at the same time. We stood like that, frozen in place, until the silence was broken by Michael's voice coming from the other room. Ryan stepped back, his expression wary again, and I turned away, focused on the task at hand. But the tension between us wasn't gone. It lurked, simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to erupt. That night, Michael suggested we all go out to dinner. We ended up at a small Italian restaurant not far from our house. It had a cozy atmosphere, and the aromas of garlic and herbs filled the air. Michael was in an upbeat mood, chatting animatedly about work, and Ryan and I exchanged glances occasionally. Every time our eyes met, I felt a jolt, a reminder of everything we hadn't said. When we got home, Michael went straight to bed, exhausted from the week. Ryan and I lingered in the living room, and silence hung between us again. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Rachel, I'm sorry if I've made things complicated." I shook my head and stepped closer to him. "It's not that, Ryan. It's just, everything happened so fast. I think we were both caught up in the moment." I reached out and placed my palm on his hand. "But I don't regret it." His eyes met mine, and there was something in them that took my breath away. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "Me too." We stood like that, and in the air between us hung everything we wanted to say but couldn't. And even though I knew we couldn't cross that line, some part of me craved it. Part of me wanted to throw caution to the wind and see where this connection could take us. But instead, I took a deep breath and stepped back, giving him a small, sad smile. "Good night, Ryan." "Good night, Rachel," he replied, his voice filled with emotions that mirrored my own. That night, lying in bed, I realized that whatever had started between Ryan and I wasn't over. It was just the beginning of something that we would have to thoroughly overcome, something that could either bring us closer together or tear us apart. And as I closed my eyes, I couldn't help but wonder which path we would eventually choose. Let me know in the comments what you think about it. I don't miss a comment. If you like this true story, subscribe and like it. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.